it's Amber from Amber Eats Books, and today I'm here to bring you my weekly wrap-up. I had a fairly good reading week this week. I really enjoyed a lot of the books that I read. I also had a little bit more time to read this week, only because the kids were in school. I had to rearrange my reading schedule. All summer I've been reading, early in the morning before the kids had actually gotten out of bed, and later at night when it was time to go to sleep, and not quite as much during the middle of the day. So this week I kind of had to reverse that, and I couldn't read right when I woke up, but I could read more throughout the middle of the day because they were gone, and then I could read in the evening. Next week might be a different story, but I'll get into that in my TBR video that will probably be following this one. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get into these books. Again, I'm going to go through these books in the order of how I rated them. So the one book that I did not rate this week at all was Going Bovine by Libba Bray. I actually started reading this book and the writing style of it just wasn't for me. It was a little too young for me, a little too high schoolish. I don't know how else to put it, but it just really wasn't my thing, which I was kind of disappointed because, as you all know, I am a huge fan of Libba Bray's series, The Diviners, and I was hoping this was going to be a great follow-up or something similar to that, because I had heard a lot of good things about this, but because the writing itself and the way, it was a lot of dialogue, a lot of characters, the way that it was written, I just personally knew I wasn't going to enjoy it for that fact alone, but I also didn't want to rate it because I did not read the story. I'm sure it was a perfectly great story for a younger audience. It just wasn't something that I was into, so I decided to DNF it and just move on. The next book that I will be talking about is The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. I actually gave this book 3 stars, but that could be a little controversial. Let me tell you why. I've heard a lot of good things about this book. Many people have recommended it. It's highly rated on Goodreads. So I went into this book thinking it was going to be one thing, and it turned out to be a little something else. A couple people warned me that it had a lot of descriptions in it, but I guess I just was not as prepared for that as I thought I was going into the story. So it literally felt like 2 books in one. This is the story about the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. Half of the book, literally, is about the construction of it and what they had to go through to get permits and, build the Ferris wheel and all these types of things. That, to me, just isn't that interesting. It was so full of description, and there wasn't dialogue or anything to really help move it along in that aspect, that for me, I just wasn't going to enjoy those parts, and I knew I wasn't. The other half of the book is about a serial killer named H.H. Holmes that just happened to be murdering people right around the same time that this World Fair was going on in Chicago. He used the fair partly to lure some victims, but for the majority, the 2 stories don't really cross over that much, other than there's a World Fair being built and he's killing people during the World Fair. Beyond that, they don't really cross. So literally, it was like every other chapter would be about the serial killer. So I know this might be a little controversial, but I just skipped the chapters on the World Fair construction. I did skim a little bit of those chapters just to make sure I wasn't missing anything out about the serial killer, because that, like I said, the construction part just really did not interest me at all. The serial killer part, however, did interest me, so I read all of those parts of the book. So I've read about half of the book, whereas other people maybe have read the whole thing. I do like his writing, however. I really do like his writing. Like I said, in this book, it was a very nonfiction book. There was no dialogue to really move into, get the plot moving. As far as that goes, it kind of read like almost like a Forensic Files type show. You would just hear it in the background. It was just him stating what happened without putting his own viewpoint or his own feelings on it. So it was very much like a documentary type book. I really did enjoy the story about the serial killer, though. It is a true story, so I was very interested to see what happened. How did he get away with things? Just the arrogance of him, like I was appalled at that. So for that fact alone, I really do recommend picking up this book. And if you are into construction and into the history of the World Fair or whatever that entails, then you would definitely enjoy the other half of this book because it's written the exact same way as the serial killer portion. Like I said, I, however, just was not interested in that part. So 3 stars, highly recommend, though I will be checking out more by Erik Larson in the future. The next book I read was Vilonia by Andrew Michael Hurley. I went into this book expecting a little bit more from it than what I ended up getting. I rated it 3.5 stars, though. I did completely enjoy the story. It was very slow-paced, however. It wasn't a fast-paced novel. It wasn't something that just drew me in right away. However, the writing is fantastic, and I think overall the story was solid. I will say that because it wasn't fast-paced, I just didn't find myself caring as much about the characters as I had wanted to. I thought it was going to be a bit more of a creepier read than what it actually is. I felt like it was building up to this creepy event that happened and the scenario, and the whole time I'm reading it, I'm like, okay, it's going to get there, it's going to get there. And then it didn't really get there. Like, it got there, but it just kind of glanced over the event and didn't really take me as far into it as I wanted to go. I did see the beauty in it. I did really love the brotherly bond between the 2 characters and their struggles and just a different outlook on life and a different viewpoint of life than what I'm accustomed to. Like I said, really enjoyed it. 3.5 stars. If you are looking for a slow read, something that deals heavily with religious aspects and isn't overall too scary, this is definitely the book for you. The next book that I'm going to read, I actually had picked this book up from the library earlier in the summer. I had heard some recommendations about it, but then when I brought it home and I actually looked at it and I was reading the description and everything, I was a little hesitant, only because of the writing, because I didn't know. I thought it was going to be similar to like Going Bovine, where the character is a very young character, and sometimes just those younger viewpoints and I don't mesh. Not saying that there's anything wrong with books with younger viewpoints, because absolutely they are necessary. They are necessary for young adults and middle school readers who need to have that level of reading. Just for me, however, sometimes it doesn't mesh. So I took this book, I brought it back to the library, and I said, I'm not gonna read it. However, then I saw Graham from Mega Man Chief Fan and Peter Likes Books. They did a buddy reads of this book, and they both highly recommended it. So I just decided to put my reservations aside and pick it back up. And that book is The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, a novel by Sherman Alexie, and the art is by Ellen Forney. This is a surprise read for me because I DNF'd Going Bovine, so I only had 4 books left over for the week, so I had finished all of my books early, and I decided to pick this one up because it was a shorter read for me, and I ended up finishing this and The Devil in the White City both on Saturday. So this book is the story of a 14-year-old Indian boy. He decides that his life on the reservation is not all that he wanted it to be. He gets picked on a lot. He is treated very poorly. He also has some physical disabilities that he had been born with, so he is trying to overcome those as well. So just overall, his life is not what he envisioned for himself. So he decides to kind of take this courageous step and transfer out of his school on the reservation and go to a pretty much all-white school in a bordering town. He really got to me in a way that I didn't think that he would. I rated this book 3.75 stars. It was very emotional in some points, emotional in a way that I just didn't think, due to the writing and to the character and all of that, that you would think from just glancing over the book. It did have funny parts. It was humorous. It is written from the viewpoint of a 14-year-old boy, so obviously there are those things that just make it funny and whatnot. There are some pictures. They're actually drawn from the viewpoint of the character. He considers himself an artist or cartoonist, so he is drawing these little things to illustrate some things that happen in his life. And really, overall, I really enjoyed this book. I did have a couple of problems with it. I didn't like some of the terminology used here and there. I didn't like all of the negativity in the book at times. It did kind of grate on me just a little bit, but the author kind of addressed that here and there, and it did alleviate that a little bit for me as the book went on. The arc of the story, though, was just really moving, really touching, and there was just some points of this book that were very thought-provoking, and I really enjoyed it, and I can't recommend this book enough. The next book I read was A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. Completely creepy in a way that I really wanted for a fall read. There were parts of this book that were so disturbing that I almost didn't want to finish reading it. But then I did. I kept going, and I was glad that I did, because it's one of those stories that will stick with me as far as that creepy, scary kind of factor goes. I really enjoyed the characters. I didn't enjoy them because they were likable. I enjoyed them because they were not all there, all of the characters. There was something a little wrong with each and every one, and that just really made it a fascinating read. So I highly recommend this book if you are into exorcisms or just want a creepy fall, Halloweenish, getting closer to Halloween type story. I really, really recommend it. And the last and final book I read this week was Rules of the Wild by Francesca Marciano. This book kind of blew me away as far as the writing style goes. I have had this book sitting on my shelf for, I don't know, a year, maybe 2. I'm not exactly sure when I bought it. I hadn't been keeping track prior to having my booktube channel. Now I keep track of when I get every single book, but it had just been sitting on my shelf. I don't think the cover really called to me, as I said in my TBR video. It's kind of blah. I don't really like the sepia toned cover. It just really doesn't do anything for me, but my gosh, the story inside of this book was fantastic. It takes place in Africa, and the author has spent a lot of time in Africa, and she just captured these descriptions. Oh my gosh, they were so beautiful. I felt like I was in Africa. I felt like I was on the hot plains or during the middle of like a torrential downpour type of a storm, and the animals and just everything was beautiful as far as that goes. Overall, though, the story is not a happy one. It is kind of a melancholy one. It is a little depressing at times. The main character to me isn't really a likable character, but she is a relatable character. It is just one of those stories where you see everything going off the rails, but you can't help but to read and to keep going to find out what happens and where the story is going. I just really loved it. I really loved the writing, so I'm definitely going to be checking out more books by her in the future. So that wraps up all of my books for this week. I feel like I had a really great reading week. I read 5 books, DNF'd 1, but the books that I read were just substantial, and I'm so glad that I read them. They really, really impacted me in different ways. If you guys have read any of these books and would like to talk about them, please don't hesitate to use the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and as always, happy reading.